The morning started like most of my workdays. I pulled into the hospital garage a little before 7, the winter frost still clinging to the windshield. The heater was just beginning to warm the car, and the smell of black coffee filled the cabin from the thermos sitting in the cup holder. I sat there for a moment before getting out. Just a quiet pause before a long shift. My phone buzzed. A message from my son. "Good luck today, Dad. Don't forget we're finishing the treehouse tonight." I smiled without realizing it, and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Charlie had turned 9 the month before, and lately he'd been talking about that treehouse like it was the most important construction project in the world. I had promised him we'd finish the frame before Christmas. I grabbed my bag and stepped out into the cold air. The hospital doors slid open with the usual mechanical sigh. Inside, the smell of disinfectant and coffee mixed with the quiet hum of morning activity. After 12 years as a trauma surgeon, early shifts didn't feel early anymore. They were just routine. Rounds, charts, operating room. The rhythm of it all had a kind of calm to it. Late that morning, between cases, my phone rang again. It was Dr. Elaine Carter, the head of pediatrics and one of the few colleagues I trusted enough to call a friend. Her voice was steady, but there was something under it. "Do you have time to grab lunch?" she asked. "I need to talk to you about something." That wasn't unusual by itself. Doctors talk. But there was a pause after she said it. A quiet pause that made me look down at the chart in front of me without really seeing it. "Sure," I said. "Cafeteria in 20? 20 works." The cafeteria was mostly empty that time of day. Sunlight came through the tall windows and landed across the tables in pale winter stripes. The place smelled faintly like soup and toasted bread. Elaine was already sitting when I arrived. She had a bowl in front of her, but hadn't touched it. She stirred the spoon slowly while I sat down. Then she looked up at me. "I saw Charlie last week," she said. That made me blink. "My son?" I asked. "Yes." She set the spoon down. "Your wife brought him in for a routine checkup." I nodded slowly. Melanie handled most of the appointments. With my schedule, that was just how things worked. Elaine folded her hands. There were bruises on his arms. The words were calm, clinical, but they landed heavily. "What kind of bruises?" I asked. She held my gaze. Finger-shaped. I felt my hand tighten slightly around the coffee cup. Elaine leaned forward a little. "When I asked about them, your wife said he'd been playing rough with his cousin." I didn't respond right away. The cafeteria hum filled the silence between us. Finally, I asked quietly, "And you believe that?" Elaine shook her head once. "I documented everything," she said. "But without more evidence, I couldn't push it further." She paused. Then she added softly, "I'm telling you as your friend." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Through the window, a nurse walked across the courtyard carrying a clipboard. Normal hospital life. Inside my chest, something small and cold had already started forming. That evening, Charlie and I worked in the backyard. The frame of the treehouse was almost finished. The boards smelled like fresh pine, and the air carried that sharp winter bite that comes right before snow. Charlie was holding the measuring tape while I adjusted one of the beams. "You think it'll hold a rope bridge?" he asked. "Eventually," I said. Eventually is dad language for yes. I laughed quietly. He was in a good mood. Just the two of us. But when the back door opened and Melanie stepped outside, something changed. "Dinner in 10, she said. Then she added casually, "My sister's bringing Donnie over tonight." Charlie's shoulders stiffened. It was subtle. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But I did. He didn't say anything. Just nodded and rolled the measuring tape back up. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying closer attention. Not in an obvious way, just observing. Charlie was relaxed when it was the two of us. But whenever Melanie mentioned her family, Sunday dinners, visits to her parents' house, time with his cousin, he grew quieter, smaller. One evening I suggested we skip the next family dinner. Melanie's reaction was immediate. "What's wrong with you?" she said, setting a basket of laundry down harder than necessary. "They're my family." "I know," I said calmly. "But Charlie seems uncomfortable around them." Her expression hardened. "You're being paranoid. I'm being observant." She crossed her arms. "You're trying to isolate us from my family." I didn't raise my voice. "I'm trying to understand what's going on." She shook her head sharply. "You're never even here, Daniel. You're always at the hospital." The conversation ended the way some conversations do. Not with resolution, just silence. Later that night, I found Charlie sitting halfway up the staircase. He must have heard everything. "I'm okay, Dad," he said quietly. I sat down beside him. You shouldn't have to be okay, I said. For a while we just sat there. Then I asked gently, can you tell me what happens at Grandma's house? Charlie looked down at his hands. Donnie says I'm weak because I don't like football. He shrugged a little. Aunt Lisa laughs. I waited. The hallway light hummed softly above us. Finally I asked, has anyone ever hurt you there? Charlie hesitated. Then he said something that stayed with me. Mom says I'm just being sensitive. 3 weeks later, I boarded a flight to Denver for a medical conference. Melanie had been the one pushing me to go. It's good for your career, she said. Charlie and I will stay with my parents while you're gone. Something about her enthusiasm had bothered me. I couldn't explain why, but I went anyway. On the second night of the conference, my phone buzzed while I was in the hotel bar reviewing notes. It was a message from my neighbor, Mark Reynolds. The text was short. Daniel, call me. It's about Charlie. I have a video. I stepped outside into the cold air and called immediately. Mark answered on the first ring. His voice sounded tight. I didn't know if I should send it, he said. Send what? There was a short pause. I heard yelling in your yard earlier, he said. I looked out the window and I recorded it. Another pause. I think you need to see it. A file appeared on my phone. My hands were very still as I pressed play. Then I watched. And by the time the video ended, I understood something very clearly. My son had been standing alone in the rain, and the people around him weren't strangers. They were family. I put the phone face down on the table. Then I booked the first flight home, and one more call I hadn't made in almost 10 years. Then I waited. The flight home didn't leave for another 3 hours. I stayed outside the hotel for a while after watching the video. The cold air felt sharp against my face, but it helped me think clearly. I watched the clip again, not because I wanted to, because I needed to understand it. The camera angle was from Mark's second-floor window across the fence line. The image shook a little from the rain hitting the glass. Charlie stood in the middle of the yard. His jacket was soaked through. His shoulders were hunched slightly, the way people stand when they're cold but trying not to show it. Around him stood 7 adults. Melanie, her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, her brother, and Charlie's cousin. The rain made the scene blurry in places, but the movement was unmistakable. One after another, they stepped forward, hands raised, hands lowered. My son didn't run. He just stood there. The video ended a few seconds after the back door closed. I watched it 3 times before I called Mark again. How long was he outside? I asked. I'm not sure exactly, he said. About 10 minutes after I recorded it, I called the police. You called the police? Anonymous tip, he said quietly. Child in distress. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. They showed up about 20 minutes later, he continued. By then your wife had already brought him inside. What did she tell them? That he locked himself out by accident. There was a short silence between us. Where is Charlie now? I asked. I saw them leave about an hour ago, Mark said. All of them. Big SUV. Looked like they were heading toward your in-laws' place. I looked at the hotel entrance behind me. People were walking in and out. Normal conference chatter. Luggage rolling across the lobby floor. Life continuing. Mark, I said, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Make copies of that video. I already did. Put it on a flash drive. Done. Upload it somewhere secure. Already there. I let out a slow breath. Good, I said. Then he asked the question everyone eventually asks. What are you going to do? I'm coming home. Back inside the hotel room, I opened my contacts list. There was a number I hadn't used in years. Caroline Vega. During my residency, she had been one of the sharpest physicians in the hospital. Later, she left medicine and became a child advocacy attorney. We stayed in touch for a few years. Then life happened. Careers. Marriage. Time. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment before I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Daniel. Her voice sounded surprised. It's been a while. It has. There was a brief pause. What's going on? She asked. I need your help, I said. It's about my son. Her tone changed immediately. Tell me everything. I emailed the video while I spoke. I told her about the bruises Elaine had noticed, about the strange tension Charlie showed around Melanie's family, about the video Mark recorded. When I finished, there was silence on the line for several seconds. Finally, she said quietly, That's prosecutable abuse. I know. Multiple adults. Coordinated behavior. Physical and psychological harm. Her voice had moved fully into professional mode. I can file for emergency custody first thing tomorrow morning. Good. Can you get home tonight? I'm boarding a flight in 2 hours. Then I'll meet you there in the morning, she said. We'll do this properly. I appreciated that word. Properly. Not emotionally. Not recklessly. Properly. The plane lifted off a little after midnight. Most passengers slept. I didn't. I watched the video again, but this time I wasn't watching it as a father. I was watching it like a surgeon. Carefully. Objectively. Details. Gerald Escobar stepped forward first. Open palm. A practiced motion. Then Charlene. 2 quick strikes. Heath pushed Charlie before hitting him. Aggression layered with frustration. But it was Melanie that stayed with me. She waited until the end. Until everyone else had taken their turn. Then she walked forward slowly. Said something I couldn't hear. Struck him once. Then pushed him toward the door. When he reached for the handle, she locked it. The moment lasted less than 10 seconds. But it told me something important. This wasn't chaos. It was structure. And structures can be dismantled. Caroline was waiting at baggage claim the next morning. She wore a gray coat and carried a folder already thick with paperwork. Coffee, she asked, handing you one. Thank you. We walked toward the parking lot. I reviewed the video about 12 times, she said. I've already drafted emergency custody paperwork and a temporary restraining order. That fast. Daniel, she said calmly. When 7 adults hit a child on camera, the paperwork moves quickly. I nodded. What do we need next? 2 things, she said. Medical documentation and witness confirmation. Elaine Carter can examine Charlie, I said. She's chief of pediatrics. Perfect. She opened the folder and showed me the forms. Once the judge signs these, we can legally remove him from that house. We reached my car. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me carefully. I need to ask you something. Okay. What are you planning to do after we get Charlie back? The question hung in the air. I'm planning to make sure this never happens again. She studied my face. Daniel, be careful. I will. Because if you lose control, even once, their lawyer will use it. I understood what she meant. Anger is easy. Evidence is stronger. I'm not going to lose control, I said. Then I added quietly, I'm going to use systems. When we reached my house later that night, it felt strangely empty. Charlie's shoes were still by the door. The half-finished treehouse plans were still on the desk in his room. Everything looked exactly the same, except it wasn't. Caroline set up her laptop in my office. I asked a private investigator I trust to run background checks on your in-laws, she said. Just in case. What did he find? She turned the screen toward me. Patterns. Gerald Escobar had been fired from 3 jobs over the past 15 years. Each incident involved anger complaints. Charlene had 2 previous reports filed with Child Protective Services. Both cases mysteriously closed. Heath had a DUI that had been quietly reduced. Landon had a past restraining order. I leaned back in the chair. They protect each other, I said. Yes, Caroline replied. That's exactly what this looks like. She closed the laptop slowly. Tomorrow morning we go before the judge. We get the order. Then we pick up your son. I nodded. What about tonight? She shook her head. Tonight we wait. Waiting can feel like the hardest part, but sometimes it's the most important step. I spent the rest of the night reading through the investigators' reports, learning everything about the people who had surrounded my son in that yard. Carefully, patiently, because once the custody order was signed, everything else would begin to move, and I wanted to be ready. I set the folder down on the desk. Then I waited for morning. The courthouse opened at 8. Caroline and I were already there. Family court buildings have a certain atmosphere. Quiet hallways, fluorescent lights, the soft shuffle of paperwork and low voices. No one raises their voice there. Everything moves slowly and formally, which is exactly how the law is supposed to work. We sat on a wooden bench outside the judge's office while Caroline reviewed the documents one more time. Emergency custody petition, temporary restraining orders, supporting affidavits, attached evidence. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message from Mark. Video is backed up in 3 places now. I typed a simple reply. Thank you. Then I put the phone face down and waited. At exactly 9 o'clock, the clerk opened the door. Judge Harper will see you now. Inside, the judge sat behind a wide desk stacked with files. He looked like a man who had spent decades listening to family disputes. Tired, but attentive. Caroline handed him the petition. He read silently for several minutes. The room was completely quiet except for the sound of paper turning. Eventually, he reached the printed still frames from the video. His eyes paused there. He leaned back in his chair. Is the video file included in the court record? He asked. Yes, Your Honor, Caroline said. And medical documentation? Pending examination later today. He nodded slowly. Then he looked directly at me. Dr. Carter, how long have you suspected something was wrong? I answered honestly. Not long enough. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he picked up a pen. I'm granting the emergency custody order, he said. The pen moved across the paper. A signature. One sheet. A legal decision that would change everything. He slid the documents back across the desk. Retrieve the child immediately, he said, and file medical documentation within 24 hours. Understood, Caroline replied. Also, he added, I'm ordering that none of the named individuals have contact with the child until the custody hearing. I nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. 40 minutes later, we were standing on the front porch of my in-laws' house. 2 police officers stood beside us. Not aggressive, just present. Caroline held the folder. The door opened. Trudy Escobar looked at us and froze. Her eyes moved from the officers, to me, to the paperwork in Caroline's hands. Melanie, she called into the house. Her voice had already shifted from confident to sharp. Melanie appeared a few seconds later. Charlie stood behind her. When he saw me, his entire face changed. It was a small moment, but I noticed it. Relief. Dad. He started moving toward me, but Melanie's hand closed on his shoulder. Daniel, what is this? She demanded. Caroline stepped forward. We have an emergency custody order, she said calmly. She handed Melanie the document. We are here to remove Charlie from the premises. Melanie stared at the paper. This is ridiculous, she said. You can't just show up like this. One of the officers spoke. Ma'am, please release the child. The next few minutes were loud. Gerald came down the hallway shouting about lawyers. Charlene started filming with her phone until the officer told her to lower it. Heath stepped closer, clearly trying to intimidate through proximity. But Caroline never raised her voice. If anyone interferes with this court order, she said evenly, you will be arrested. Eventually, Melanie's grip loosened. Charlie ran straight to me. He wrapped his arms around my waist. I want to go home, he said quietly. I put my arm around his shoulders. You are home, I told him. Elaine was waiting when we arrived at the hospital later that morning. She greeted Charlie gently and led him to the examination room. Medical documentation in abuse cases requires careful procedure. Photographs, measurements, notes, chain of custody. While she worked, Caroline and I waited in the hallway. After about 30 minutes, Elaine stepped out. Her expression was calm but firm. There are older bruises layered under newer ones, she said quietly. How old? Several weeks, possibly months. I nodded slowly. That confirmed what I had already suspected. This has been ongoing, she said. Yes. I'm filing a mandatory report with Child Protective Services. I understand. She placed a hand briefly on my arm. You did the right thing bringing him in. That evening, Charlie and I sat on the couch watching a movie. A simple animated one he liked. The living room lights were dim. The house felt different with him back in it. Safer. About halfway through the movie, he asked a question. Dad, yeah. Am I going back there? I shook my head. No, you promise? I promise. He nodded once. Then he leaned against my shoulder and kept watching the movie. Later that night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in my office. The investigator's reports were spread across the desk. I began organizing them carefully, not emotionally, methodically. Step 1, secure custody. Step 2, document abuse. Step 3, ensure accountability. I opened a new folder on the desk because the Escobar family believed something very simple. They believed that when families lie together, the truth disappears. But systems don't work that way. Systems keep records, emails, licenses, employment files, public filings. And I had begun to realize something important. Every single person in that video had something they depended on. A job, a reputation, a license, a community position. All of them had built their lives on an image of respectability. I closed the folder. Then I made the first phone call. To a journalist I had met 2 years earlier during a hospital investigation. The phone rang twice. Hello. Hi, Martin, I said calmly. This is Dr. Daniel Carter. I think I may have a story you'll want to look into. Then I waited. The call with Martin didn't last long. Investigative reporters usually recognize the difference between rumors and evidence within the first minute of a conversation. Dr. Carter, he said after listening quietly, Are you telling me there's documented video of a child being assaulted by multiple adults? Yes. And it's already part of the court record? Yes. There was a pause while he typed. I'll need the case number. I gave it to him. Everything in that file is public record now, I said calmly. Anyone can request it. Understood. Then he asked the question good reporters always ask. Why are you telling me this? I thought about that for a moment before answering. Because systems sometimes move slowly, I said. And when harm happens inside families, people often look away. He didn't reply immediately. All right, he said finally. I'll review the documents. Then he added one more thing. If the evidence is as clear as you say, this won't stay quiet. That's fine. After we hung up, I placed the phone on the desk and looked at the folder again. Caroline had warned me to stay within the law. That part was simple. I had no interest in doing anything illegal. The truth alone would be enough. The next call was to the State Licensing Board for Social Workers. Melanie had been a licensed social worker for nearly 10 years. Ironically, she worked with vulnerable families. The woman who answered sounded polite but skeptical at first. How can I help you? I need to file a professional conduct complaint, I said. What is the nature of the complaint? Child abuse. There was a short pause. Do you have documentation? Yes. Please send it to the investigation department. I emailed the file while we were still on the phone. The video attachment took a moment to upload. When it finished, she opened it. I could hear the silence through the line. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Dr. Carter, we'll be opening an investigation immediately. I understand. Thank you for reporting this. I ended the call and wrote down the case number. Then I moved to the next file. Each person in the video had a role in their community. That was the thing about reputations. They're fragile, and they depend on trust. Gerald Escobar was a retired fire chief. He served on several city committees, including one that was reviewing candidates for the local planning commission. Positions like that rely heavily on public confidence. I drafted a short letter. Professional, direct. Attached were copies of the public court record and the still images from the video. No commentary, just documentation. Then I sent it to the commission's administrative office. Trudy Escobar ran a catering business. Small, local, built mostly on referrals from churches and community events. Businesses like that depend almost entirely on reputation. I didn't contact her clients. I didn't need to. I simply sent the same public documentation to the organization that managed vendor approvals for several local event venues. Again, no commentary, just records. Charlene Escobar, now Charlene Alvarez, operated a parenting blog. It had a modest following online. Her content focused heavily on motherhood advice and family values. Sponsors paid her to promote products to parents. Public records are searchable online. Journalists know that. So do sponsors. I sent Martin one additional note. Just a line. You may also want to look into Charlene Alvarez's online platform. Then I closed that folder too. The last file belonged to Heath Escobar. He worked as a regional manager at a manufacturing company. Corporate policies tend to be strict about employee conduct, particularly anything involving violence. I looked through the investigator's notes. There was already a DUI incident in his past. Reduced charge, but still documented. I placed the report into a separate envelope, addressed it to the company's HR compliance office. Again, nothing emotional, just records. Then I sealed the envelope and set it aside. By the time I finished organizing everything, the sun had already set. The house was quiet. Charlie had fallen asleep on the couch earlier while watching a movie. I carried him upstairs. He was getting heavier now, almost too big for that. But he didn't wake up. Once he was in bed, I sat in the chair near his window for a while. The street outside was calm, just a few cars passing occasionally. A normal neighborhood evening. Downstairs on my desk sat 6 envelopes and several email confirmations, each one addressed to a different system. Licensing boards, employers, committees, journalists. Not accusations, just information. Systems work slowly sometimes, but once they start moving, they rarely stop. 3 days later, the first changes began. Charlene's sponsors contacted her asking questions. 2 companies quietly ended their contracts. Her social media comments started filling with people asking about the allegations. Heath's company opened an internal conduct review. Colleen, the elementary school teacher, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The city commission removed Gerald's name from the planning appointment list. Trudy's catering business lost 2 event bookings in the same week. None of it happened because of threats. None of it happened because of rumors. It happened because the truth was now documented. And documentation spreads. Caroline called that evening. "I see what you're doing," she said. "I'm staying within the rules." "Yes," she replied. "But the Escobars have hired a lawyer." "That was expected. He's going to argue that you're creating a hostile environment." I leaned back in my chair. "The evidence hasn't changed." "No," she agreed. "But perception matters in court." "I understand." She was quiet for a moment. "How's Charlie?" "Better," I said. "We started therapy yesterday." "That's good." Then she added something else. "Just remember, the custody hearing is still coming." "I know." And in that room, facts matter more than reputation. I looked down at the case folder on my desk. That's why everything is documented. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. A message from the private investigator. "Found something unusual in Melanie's financial records. Call when you can." I stared at the message for a moment. Financial records were not something I had expected to become relevant. But patterns often appear where people assume no one is looking. I picked up the phone and dialed. The investigator answered immediately. "I think you'll want to hear this," he said. And I had a feeling he was right. I called Ian back immediately. He answered on the first ring. "I've been going through the financial records you authorized as part of the custody investigation," he said. "What did you find?" "There's a separate bank account in your wife's name." "That's not unusual." "No," he agreed. "But the transactions are." I leaned back in the chair and waited. "Over the past 4 years," he continued, "there have been monthly transfers from your joint savings into that account." "How much?" "About $2,000 each month." I did the math quickly in my head. "That's nearly $100,000. "Just under," he said. "And the money didn't stay in her account." "Where did it go?" "To her parents." I sat quietly for a moment. "When did those transfers start?" I asked. "Almost exactly when their catering business started failing." I understood immediately. She was supporting them financially. "Looks that way." "Anything else?" "There's something more serious," Ian said. He paused before continuing. "I found email exchanges between your wife and her sister." "What kind of exchanges?" "Advice. Advice. On how to handle a Child Protective Services investigation." I didn't say anything. Ian continued. 2 years ago, CPS opened a case involving Charlene's son. Your wife wrote several emails explaining what to say to investigators. That would be an ethics violation." "Yes," he said calmly, "especially for a licensed social worker." I wrote a few notes on the pad in front of me. "Send me copies of everything." "Already done." The next morning, I forwarded the financial records and email documentation to the state licensing board. I also sent them to Melanie's supervisor at the county agency where she worked. The email was simple. Attach documents. Timeline. No commentary. Systems prefer evidence over emotion. By the afternoon, the story had begun moving outside the legal system. Martin's article was published online. The headline was measured but direct. "When Families Protect Abuse," a case that raises serious questions. He had done thorough work. The article included confirmation of the emergency custody order, medical testimony about the bruises, witness statements from Mark, background records involving the Escobar family. The video itself was not fully shown, but still images were included. Faces blurred, actions unmistakable. By noon, the article was spreading across social media. By evening, local television stations had picked it up. Caroline called me that night. Her voice was calm but firm. "Did you give the video to the reporter?" "The video is part of the court record." "That's not what I asked." I paused before answering. I gave him the case number. She exhaled slowly. "The Escobars are furious." "That was predictable. Their lawyer is going to claim you orchestrated a smear campaign." "The evidence is still the same." "Yes," she said, "but the court doesn't like publicity." I understood what she meant. Judges prefer quiet courtrooms, not headlines. "The custody hearing is in 2 days," she continued. "You need to stay careful until then." "I will." There was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "I know why you're doing this," she said, "but don't let it turn into revenge." I thought about that for a moment. "They hurt my son," I said quietly. "I know. I'm making sure the right systems know what they did." Another pause. "Just remember," she said, "Charlie still needs you calm and focused." I am. The courthouse on the day of the hearing was unusually crowded. Normally, family courtrooms are quiet places, but media attention had changed that. Reporters waited outside the building. Cameras stayed behind the security line. Inside the courtroom, both sides took their seats. Caroline sat beside me at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle sat Melanie and her entire family. They looked exhausted, angry, defensive. Their attorney, Burton Prince, stood when the judge entered. Judge O'Connell had the kind of presence that immediately quiets a room. Gray hair, sharp eyes. He reviewed the case file in silence for several minutes before speaking. "This court's priority," he said, "is the welfare of the minor child. Everything else," he explained, "was secondary." Prince stood first. "Your Honor, we must address the misconduct of the plaintiff. Dr. Carter has intentionally leaked information to the press, creating harassment against my clients." Caroline stood calmly. "The documents referenced by the press are public court records." Prince continued anyway. "The resulting publicity has damaged my clients' reputations and created a hostile environment." Judge O'Connell looked up from the file. "Mr. Prince," he said evenly, "your clients are recorded on video striking a 9-year-old child." The courtroom went completely quiet. "That," the judge continued, "is my primary concern." Prince sat down. The first witness was Dr. Elaine Carter. Her testimony was precise, clinical. She explained the pattern of bruises, the difference between childhood injuries and adult-inflicted marks. Prince attempted cross-examination. "Children bruise easily," he said. "Yes," Elaine replied, "but not in the shape of fingerprints." The judge wrote something down. Next came Mark Reynolds. He described hearing the shouting, looking out the window, recording the video, calling the police. Prince tried suggesting Mark had a personal dispute with us. Mark remained calm. "I recorded it because a child was being hurt," he said. Nothing more. Then the judge called Charlie to the witness stand. My chest tightened slightly as he walked to the chair. He looked small sitting there, but his voice was steady. The judge spoke gently. "Charlie, can you tell me what happened that day?" Charlie explained how his cousin had been hitting him, how he pushed back, how the lamp fell, then how the adults gathered. "They said I needed to learn respect," he said. "And then they took turns hitting me." The courtroom stayed completely silent. The judge asked one final question. "Did your mother strike you?" Charlie nodded. "Yes." He swallowed once before continuing. "She hit me the hardest." I kept my hands folded on the table, calm, controlled, just listening, because sometimes the truth speaks clearly enough on its own. And that was exactly what was happening. The judge looked down at the evidence again. Then he leaned back in his chair, and for a moment the entire room waited in silence. The courtroom stayed quiet for several seconds. Judge O'Connell reviewed the documents again. The video still frames were spread across the bench beside the medical reports. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured. "I've reviewed the testimony, the medical documentation, and the recorded evidence." He paused briefly. "This is one of the clearer cases of child abuse this court has seen." Across the room, Melanie's lawyer shifted slightly in his chair, but didn't interrupt. The judge continued. 7 adults participated in the physical assault of a 9-year-old child. The evidence is consistent, corroborated, and documented. He looked directly toward Melanie and her family. "This court will not treat that as a misunderstanding." Then he turned back toward the paperwork in front of him. "I am granting full legal and physical custody of the minor child to his father, Dr. Daniel Carter." I felt the tension in my chest loosen slightly. Not relief exactly. More like the final confirmation of something I had already been preparing for. The judge continued. "The mother's parental rights are suspended pending further psychological evaluation. Any future contact will be supervised and subject to court approval." Melanie began crying softly beside her attorney. Her mother whispered something to her, but the judge raised a hand. "There will be no further discussion during this ruling." He continued reading from the order. "All members of the Escobar family are prohibited from direct contact with the minor child until further notice." Then he added one final instruction. "This court is forwarding the full case file, including the video evidence, to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges." The room remained silent. Judge O'Connell closed the folder. Court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, reporters were waiting near the exit hallway. Caroline guided Charlie and me through a side door that led toward the parking area. As we walked, I heard voices behind us. Melanie calling my name. "Daniel, wait." I stopped but didn't turn immediately. Charlie instinctively stepped closer to me. When I faced her, she looked different from the confident woman I remembered. Her voice trembled slightly. "We need to talk." "There's nothing left to discuss," I said calmly. She looked down toward Charlie. "Charlie, baby," he pressed closer against my side. "I don't want to talk," he said quietly. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've said enough already." Melanie's lawyer stepped forward, probably realizing the conversation wasn't going to change anything. Caroline opened the car door. "Let's go," she said. We left the courthouse without another word. Over the next several weeks, the legal process continued moving. The prosecutor's office filed formal charges against all 7 adults who had participated in the assault. The charges included assault of a minor, a child endangerment. Criminal conspiracy investigations expanded into several other areas as well. The licensing board suspended Melanie's social work certification pending review. The school district completed its investigation and terminated Colleen's teaching contract. Heath's company removed him from management responsibilities while reviewing the conduct complaint. Gerald quietly resigned from the city boards he served on. Charlene's blog lost nearly all of its sponsorships. And Trudy's catering business slowly stopped receiving bookings. None of these consequences came from anything dramatic. They came from systems responding to documented actions, paperwork, records, policies. Once those systems began moving, the outcomes were predictable. The criminal trial concluded several months later. All 7 defendants were convicted. The sentences varied. Melanie received probation, mandatory counseling, and court-supervised parenting classes she would never use. Gerald received a short custodial sentence. The others were given probation, community service, and required therapy. The penalties weren't severe, but they were permanent. Every conviction became part of their public record. My focus, though, had already shifted somewhere else. Charlie. He began meeting with a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. At first he spoke very little. But gradually the conversations became easier. The nightmares became less frequent. He started laughing again. He invited friends over from school, friends who weren't related to the Escobar family. We finished building the treehouse in the backyard. What had started as a simple wooden platform slowly became a much larger structure. Walls, a roof, even a small rope bridge between 2 trees. It became our project, something steady and constructive, something that belonged only to us. One evening in early spring, we were cooking dinner together. Charlie was stirring pasta on the stove. "Dad," he asked. "Yes." "Am I ever going to see Mom again?" It was a difficult question. "The court allows supervised visits," I said carefully. "But only if you want them." He thought about that for a moment. "I don't think I do." "That's her decision." He nodded slowly. "She scared me," he said. "I know. And everyone else there scared me too." I placed the plates on the table. "They can't hurt you anymore." He looked at me for a moment. "I know." And for the first time since everything happened, his voice sounded completely certain. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of Charlie's room while he slept. The stuffed dinosaur he'd had since he was 5 was still tucked under his arm. The house was quiet, calm, safe. The legal battles were finished. The systems had completed their work. But the most important part had already happened. Charlie was home, and he was healing. The rest would simply take time. About a year passed before I really noticed how quiet life had become again. Not empty quiet, just normal. The kind of quiet that comes from routine. Charlie and I had settled into a rhythm that felt steady. I adjusted my hospital schedule, so I worked fewer overnight shifts. Most evenings we cooked dinner together, usually something simple. Pasta, grilled chicken, sometimes just sandwiches if we both felt lazy. The treehouse in the backyard had slowly become something more than we originally planned. What started as a platform and a ladder now had walls, a small roof, and even a rope bridge connecting to the second tree. Charlie liked to sit up there after school with a book or his tablet. Sometimes I joined him. Sometimes I just watched from the kitchen window while making coffee. The therapist told me those quiet routines were important. Stability builds safety, and safety builds recovery. Charlie still went to therapy once a week, but the sessions had become less about fear and more about confidence. He had friends now. Real friends, kids from school who came over to play basketball in the driveway or climb up into the treehouse. It felt like the house had finally become what it was supposed to be, a home. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after everything happened, Charlie and I were finishing the last small repairs on the treehouse roof. The air was cold again, that same sharp winter air I remembered from the year before. Charlie tightened the last screw and sat back on the wooden floor. "Dad," he said, Yeah, I want to tell you something. I sat beside him. I'm listening. He looked out over the yard for a moment. I'm not scared anymore. There was something calm about the way he said it. Not dramatic, just honest. Even when I think about last year, he continued, I don't feel small anymore. I nodded. That's good. Dr. Moss had explained something similar during one of the sessions. Trauma loses power when a person feels safe again. Charlie shrugged slightly. I think it's because I know you'll always protect me. Always, I said. He leaned his head back against the wooden wall. For a few minutes we just sat there quietly. Then he said something else. I saw Mom last week. I turned slightly toward him. Where? At the grocery store. He said it casually. She tried to talk to me. What did you do? I walked away. He looked down at his hands. She said she was sorry. I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. How did that make you feel? He thought about it. I didn't feel scared, he said. I just felt nothing. That's okay. Is it? Yes. People often believe forgiveness is something that must happen, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's all right too. You get to decide who belongs in your life, I told him. He nodded once. Right now, he said, I like it being just us. I smiled. Me too. Later that night, we were inside drinking hot chocolate. Charlie was watching a movie while I cleaned the kitchen. The house was warm. The windows fogged slightly from the heat. I finished wiping the counter and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. A year earlier, everything had felt like chaos. Now everything felt ordered again. Not perfect, but stable. And stability is sometimes the best outcome you can hope for. A few weeks later, I received an email from Caroline. It wasn't about Charlie's case. That had been closed for months. The message was short. I may need your help again. Attached was a short note about another situation. Another family. Another child. Different circumstances, but the same pattern of people ignoring warning signs. I closed the laptop for a moment and thought about it. Then I reopened the email and began reading the details. Some problems don't disappear. They just appear somewhere else. And sometimes people need someone willing to look carefully at the facts. For now, though, life in our house stayed simple. Charlie grew taller. The tree house got another coat of paint. And every once in a while we sat together in the backyard at sunset just talking about ordinary things. School, friends, plans for summer. The kind of conversations that only happen when people feel safe. And that, more than anything else, was what mattered. If you made it all the way through this story, thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed listening, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the community grow. Also, I always enjoy seeing where people are watching from. So leave a comment and tell me which city you're in and what time it is there right now. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't go anywhere. 2 of the most popular stories from this channel will appear on your screen next.